Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Lancaster Safety Webinar Wednesday. My name is Emily, and I'm an OSHA online training coordinator here with Lancaster Safety. I'm joined today by Rick, who's one of our safety and health professionals. You may have had a safety question answered by him or worked with him on written programs together. So, Rick, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Emily, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited to get started. This is the time of year when we get the most record-keeping questions from our clients. This is exactly what LCI is here for. We are happy to assist you in the complex, confusing process of record-keeping and reporting. Today's webinar will cover the basics and provide you with a good foundation of knowledge for record-keeping. We'll dive into the step-by-step process and give you tools and resources to use so that you soon can be a record-keeping master. Today we're going to do three things. First, discuss record-keeping basics and provide an overview of the standard. Secondly, review how to properly maintain OSHA injury and illness logs, and also provide an overview of OSHA's reporting requirements. The records are also used by employers and employees to manage safety and health programs at individual workplaces. This information helps employers, workers, and OSHA to evaluate the safety of a workplace, understand industry hazards, and implement worker protections to reduce and eliminate hazards, which will prevent future workplace injuries and illnesses. The recording of injury or illness neither affects a person's entitlement to workers' compensation nor provides a violation of an OSHA rule.
So today's presentation will cover a lot of information with respect to OSHA's regulations, as well as non-required practices and recommendations. So we just want to take a quick minute to remind you that the information we're reviewing should be used as a tool to improving workplace safety and health, and does not create any additional legal obligations, nor does it review all obligations outlined in statutes, regulations, and standards. So let's start off with a question. Rick, does record keeping apply to everyone?
No, it doesn't apply to everyone, but it does apply to most, including those in agriculture, construction, manufacturing, transportation, utilities, and wholesale trade sectors are covered. However, OSHA does have a partial size exemption for record keeping. If your company had 10 or fewer employees at all times during the last calendar year, you do not need to keep the injury and illness records unless surveyed by OSHA or BLS. The size exemption is based on the number of employees in the entire company, including temporary employees who you supervise on a day-to-day basis in the count. The size exemption is based on the company's peak employment during the last calendar year. If at any time last year the company reached 11 or more workers, the company is not size exempt.
Okay, so we just covered the exemptions. If a company is not exempt, then what do they have to do?
Good question. So covered employers must record each fatality, injury, or illness that is work-related, is a new case, and also meets OSHA's general recording criteria, such as an incident involving a fatality, days away from work, job transfer, restriction, or other recordable injuries, such as receiving medical treatment. Don't worry though, we will be discussing OSHA's general recording criteria for you today.
Now let's move on to the all-important record-keeping forms. Now, the rule requires employers to keep 3 forms: a 300 log, a 300A summary form, and a 301 incident report. The OSHA 300 log is an outline of all work-related injuries and illnesses for the given year. It includes injury classifications and the amount of time that the employee may have been away from work or on job restriction. The OSHA 300A is a summary of the OSHA 300 log from that calendar year. It's required to be posted for 3 months. The OSHA 301 form is the injury and illness incident report. This report will provide details about each recordable incident. Now, if your company currently maintains their own injury and illness incident report, you can continue to use it as long as it has the equivalent information as OSHA's Form 301.
Now, here are a few guidelines for you when you are completing and maintaining the record-keeping forms. Employers must enter each recordable case on the forms within 7 calendar days of receiving information that a recordable case has occurred. Forms can be kept on a computer as long as they can be produced when they are needed. You must keep a separate log and summary for each physical location that is expected to be in operation for 1 year or longer. Keep in mind that a case in the log does not mean that the employer or worker was at fault or that an OSHA standard was violated. If a government representative such as OSHA or NIOSH requests for a copy of the forms, you must provide copies of the records within 4 business hours. Make sure to use the business hours of the establishment where the records are located. If an inspection is in Texas and the records are in New York, use the business hours of New York.
So this is an example of OSHA's Form 300. Column A includes the case number in order they have occurred throughout the year. Column B includes the employee's name. Now, if it's a private recordable case, you can leave the name off. Column C and D includes the injured employee's job title and the date of the injury. Column E includes the location where the incident occurred. Be more specific than just a wide area, for example, the packaging department rather than the warehouse. Column F includes a description of the recordable incident. Describe the injury or illness in its entirety, including the nature of the injury or illness, the affected body part, and what exactly caused it. The next column asks you to check one box, G through J, indicating the most severe result of the injury or illness: death, days away from work, job transfer or restriction, or other recordable cases. When recording cases that have both days away from work and restriction, you are only to check it as days away from work when classifying the case, since it's the most serious outcome. Column K and L are for recording the days away from work and how many days the employee ended up spending on restrictions or job transfer. The final column is where you check the nature of the injury or illness from 6 options: injury, skin disorder, respiratory condition, poisoning, hearing loss, or other.
The employer must first review the records and correct them if necessary, then complete the form, certify the form, and post it for 3 months. A company executive must certify the summary. This could be an owner of the company, an officer of the corporation, the highest ranking company official working at the establishment, or his or her supervisor. Be sure to post the summary form from February 1st to April 30th in an area where employees can easily review it. Please make sure that you only post the OSHA 300A summary. Do not post forms 300 or 301 as they may contain personal information.
Before we continue, let's take a brief commercial break. Hello everyone, I'd like to show you how to use the Safety Management Portal to simplify record keeping. We've got a lot of resources and helpful tools in here for you to reference, so let's start by taking a look at those. So first we have the record keeping forms. If you're sitting down to fill out your record keeping forms, it would help to have the right paperwork. Let's pull that up first. And here you'll find the downloads for the forms. Attend our annual record keeping webinar or catch the recording in the Safety Management Portal by going here. Then if you click here, you'll find the establishments that are required to complete record keeping and reporting information. And then you'll also find OSHA's reporting tool. Now we'll take a look at the how-to guides. Start with our must-know OSHA Recordkeeping Basics webpage and print out the record-keeping calendar. Reference it for important dates and key information for the reporting process. If you're a visual learner like I am, watch our record-keeping videos for instructions and more information. As well, by typing in record keeping in the search bar, it'll pull up all applicable videos and other resources. You can also find more videos in our video library. And don't forget, as you're navigating the Safety Management Portal, any information that you'd like to come back to quickly, you can bookmark it by clicking on this tab, and then following My Bookmarks. Check out our Record Keeping Frequently Asked Questions page. Record keeping questions are our most asked topic here at Lancaster Safety, so there's a good chance that any record keeping questions you might have has probably been answered and is in our Safety Management Portal. But you can still contact our team for any questions you have. And then you'll want to save your forms. After you've filled out your record-keeping logs, feel free to send them over to our team if you'd like us to review them for inaccuracy. Our team can help determine if you're over-reporting, or if there are any red flags, or to simply provide advice. Once your forms are finalized, save them in the file vault. Though record-keeping deadlines occur once a year, you should be recording injuries and illnesses as they happen, no matter what time of the year it is. Our team is here to help keep safety an ongoing priority. If you'd like a personal tour of the Safety Management Portal, schedule a live demo today.
So we reviewed the information that must be recorded, but what about private information that other employees shouldn't know about? Can employees expect any privacy in the record-keeping process?
For certain privacy concern cases, employers must not enter the employee's name on the 300 form. Instead, they are to enter privacy case. A separate confidential list of the employee's names and case numbers must be kept by employers and provided to the OSHA inspector upon request. Privacy concern cases are defined very specifically in the rule. These cases are an injury or illness to an intimate body part or the reproductive system, an injury or illness resulting from sexual assault, mental illness, HIV infection, hepatitis or tuberculosis, needle stick and sharps injuries that are contaminated with another person's blood or potentially infectious material, or illness cases where employees independently and voluntarily request that their names not be entered onto the log. For a privacy concern case, if the employee's identity can still be implied, the employer may use some discretion in describing the case as well. The rule requires that enough information be entered to identify the cause and general severity of the incident. For example, a sexual assault case can be entered as assault, or injury to a reproductive organ can be entered as lower abdominal injury. The employer is not required to go into graphic detail of these types of cases. If the employer gives out the forms to the public, the names must be removed first. There are exceptions for employee access, OSHA access, auditors, insurance, or law enforcement personnel.
How long do we need to keep these records? Well, just 5 years, and this will help keep those filing cabinets from overflowing. During the retention period, the employer must update the 300 form to include any cases that are newly discovered or whose status has changed, but does not have to change the summary or the 301 form. If the outcome or extent of an injury or illness changes after you've recorded the case, simply draw a line through the original entry, or if you wish, delete or white out the original entry. Then write the new entry where it belongs. Remember, you need to record the most serious outcome for each case. OSHA also requires a number of employers to electronically submit a summary of injuries and illnesses to OSHA.
So once you've completed your forms, you might be required to send them into OSHA electronically. Form 300A, or the Summary of Work-Related Injuries and Illnesses, must be submitted by establishments with 250 or more employees that are currently required to keep OSHA injury and illness records. For a full list of exempt establishments, review the non-mandatory Appendix A to Subpart B partially exempt industries on OSHA's website. Also, establishments with 20 to 249 employees that are classified in certain industries with historically high rates of occupational injuries and illnesses. For a full list of those industries with 20 to 249 employees that must submit this form, you can also review the OSHA 300A table on OSHA's website. Also, the Form 300 log of work-related injuries and illnesses and the Form 301 injury and illness incident reports must be submitted by establishments with 100 or more employees that are in high-hazard industries, such as manufacturing and foundries. For a detailed list of designated industries, review Appendix B to Subpart E of Part 1904 on OSHA's website. When making electronic submissions to OSHA, establishments must also include their legal company name. If you are still unsure if and what you should electronically submit to OSHA, check out the ITA coverage application or call Lancaster Safety for assistance.
Now, for those who are required to submit record-keeping information, OSHA utilizes the public's One Account access to government applications, login.gov. You must have both an account for the injury tracking application, also known as the ITA, and a login.gov account with the same email address to access the ITA. Information can be submitted 3 ways: entering the data manually using an ITA web form, uploading a CSV file, or some companies may use an automated record-keeping system that has the ability to transmit data via an application programming interface. Keep in mind that OSHA-approved state plans and state and local government establishments may have different submission requirements. Remember, the deadline to submit information to OSHA is March 2nd of each year, and they start accepting form submissions in January. Should employees be involved in the record keeping process?
This is a good question. So overall, the rule requires that each employer to set up a way for employees to report injuries and illnesses, and that they must be properly informed on how to do so as well. This is a very basic step to make sure employees report cases so they can get into the records. You can get your employees involved by discussing the recordable injuries each year, identify some common injuries, causes, reasonings to develop procedures to mitigate those hazards, and prevent the recordable injury or illness from occurring again. Here at LCI, we discuss all near misses and first aid incidents monthly at our safety committee meeting. It provides an opportunity for the committee to review any potential contributing factors to that incident, to discuss any trends that we may be seeing as well, and determine if an additional engineering, administrative, or PPE control should be implemented at that time. Now let's talk about Section 11C of the Act. Employers are required to inform workers of the right to report work-related injuries and illnesses without the fear of retaliation. Please understand that the rule does not ban appropriate disciplinary, incentive, or drug testing programs. However, it does allow OSHA to issue citations for retaliatory actions against workers when those programs are used to discourage workers from exercising their right to report workplace injuries and illnesses. To clarify this, an employer will be in violation of OSHA's new final rule if the company either fails to have a procedure for employees to report work-related injuries or illnesses, or its reporting procedure is unreasonable. You must not discharge or in any manner discriminate against any employee for reporting a work-related injury or illness. When it comes to incentive programs, it can be used to promote workplace safety and health. However, the incentive program should not be implemented in a manner that discourages reporting. Emily, could you give us an example of how an incentive program could discourage reporting? Also, are employers permitted to drug test employees after an incident?
That's a great question. So OSHA provides the following examples for this. If an employer raffles off a $500 gift card at the end of each month in which there are no workplace injuries, this incentive program would violate the anti-retaliation provision as it withholds the incentive, and in this example, the $500 gift card, when an employee reports a work-related injury. Now, on the other hand, an acceptable alternative would be for the employer to raffle off a gift card each month in which employees universally comply with legitimate safety rules, such as using required fall protection and following lockout tagout rules. Now, the key here is whether the employer is withholding a benefit because of a reported work-related injury. Incentive programs that penalize the reporting of injuries and illnesses are likely to result in an OSHA citation. Now, when it comes to the drug testing policies, OSHA states that they will consider factors including whether the employer has a reasonable basis for concluding that drug use could have contributed to the injury or illness. OSHA is looking at whether an employer is using drug and/or alcohol testing as a form of discipline against employees who report a workplace injury, which could be retaliation. Consequently, post-accident drug testing is permitted if all workers involved in the accident are tested in order to gain insight into the cause of the accident. But drug testing an employee whose injury could not possibly be related to drug use, such as a repetitive strain injury, would then be seen as retaliation.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Therefore, it's important to know that OSHA prohibits employers from taking adverse action against employees for reporting work-related injuries or illnesses. To clarify, adverse action is taken by the employer that would discourage a reasonable employee from reporting a work-related illness or injury accurately.
All right, so let's take just a quick break and do an Insta Safety quiz. So when must employers post their 300A forms from the previous year? So this is an important question, so if you're not sure, make sure to write this down. Is it A, January 1st through March 31st, B, June 1st through December 31st, C, February 1st through April 30th, or D, year round? So you can put your answer in the chat box below. All right, so the answer is C, February 1st through April 30th. So again, if you weren't sure of that or you didn't remember that from the information we went through, please write that down. Employers must post their OSHA 300A injury and illness log from the previous year in an area that all employees may view it. So this could be in a lunch or break room, and that's from February 1st through April 30th annually. So it can be really confusing trying to figure out if temporary workers, subs, and employees at different locations are covered for record keeping. So Rick, can you just give us some of the guidelines that we need to follow here?
Yeah, definitely. So employees on the payroll must be included in the employer's records unless the company is acting as a temporary help service. Temporary workers will be the employees of the party exercising day-to-day control over them, and the supervising party will record their injuries and illnesses. We often receive questions from companies who had temporary employee or subcontractor get injured on the job. Typically in construction, they are unsure if the subcontractor or the general contractor should be recording this injury. What it comes down to is the company who is in charge of the day-to-day supervision of that employee is required to record that OSHA recordable injury. This way we can make sure that the case is recorded appropriately on the applicable OSHA 300 log. When the employer has more than one establishment, a separate log must be kept for each establishment expected to be in operation for more than 1 year. OSHA defines an establishment as a single physical location where business is conducted or where services or industrial operations are performed. If your company has a continuous presence at a client's site or job site for 1 year or longer, you must treat that as an establishment and maintain an OSHA 300 log. For the short-term establishments, such as those expected to be in operation for less than a year, the employer may keep one log that includes all of the injuries and illnesses of the short-term establishments, or keep logs by state or district.
Here's another slide that we suggest taking some notes on. When do employers need to report an accident to OSHA?
All employers under OSHA jurisdiction must report these incidents to OSHA, even employers who are exempt from maintaining OSHA record-keeping forms due to company size or industry. OSHA requires you to report all work-related fatalities within 8 hours and those fatalities that occur within 30 days of a work-related incident. And all incidents involving an inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or eye loss must be reported within 24 hours. You can report these to OSHA by calling OSHA's free confidential number, calling your closest OSHA area office during normal business hours, or using the new online form. However, when you report these, you have to be prepared to supply your business name, names of the employees affected, location and time of the incident, brief description of the incident, and a contact person and phone number.
Okay, so when do we need to record an injury then?
So yeah, if your company experiences one or more of the following, you'll need to report it. Either death, days away from work, restricted work activity, transfer to another job, medical treatment beyond first aid, loss of consciousness, significant injury or illness diagnosed by a physician or licensed healthcare professional. But don't worry, we will go into the detail a little later about how OSHA defines the differences between medical treatment and first aid. For now, it is important to know that all work-related cases involving loss of consciousness must be recorded.
All right, here's another question for you. What defines work-relatedness when it comes to recordable incidents?
So work-relatedness is presumed for injuries and illnesses resulting from events or exposures occurring in the work environment, unless an exception specifically applies. OSHA defines the work environment as the establishment and other locations where one or more employees are working or present as a condition of their employment. The work environment includes not only physical locations, but also the equipment or materials used by employees during the course of his or her work.
A case is presumed work-related if and only if an event or exposure in the work environment is a discernible cause of the injury or illness, or of a significant aggravation to a pre-existing condition.
Now let me cover the exemptions because there are quite a few. Work-related exposures include most of the employee's activities on the employer's premises, as well as situations off premises where employees are engaged in job tasks or as a condition of their employment. Here are some examples of incidents that would not need to be recorded, such as if an employee catches a cold or a flu, they get injured in a voluntary wellness program, or if they're injured in a motor vehicle accident while on their lunch break. We do want to note that for record-keeping purposes, company parking lots are considered part of the employer's premises and therefore part of the establishment. For example, let's say an employee arrives for work, and as she is walking across the parking lot prior to the start of her shift, she is stung by a bee and has an allergic reaction. She is taken to the doctor where she is given an injection and a prescription. Is this case considered recordable? Yes, this would be a recordable case. The parking lot is considered part of the establishment and thus the work environment. Punching in and out on a time clock does not determine work-relatedness. The bee sting is considered a work-related injury and the employee was administered a prescription, which is medical treatment. Now let's discuss another tricky scenario here. So an employee is participating in a lineman's rodeo sponsored by the employer on the employer's property, but not on company time. The worker falls and injures his back and breaks his leg. He is off work for weeks. Is this considered an OSHA recordable injury? In this case, you are not required to record an injury or illness. The injury or illness occurs solely from the voluntary participation in a recreational activity. However, if the employee was at the rodeo as a condition of his employment, the case would be considered work-related and recordable. Some more exemptions include any employee symptoms that come about solely due to a non-work-related incident. An example of this exception could be if an employee starts vomiting at work due to something they ate the night before.
More and more businesses have employees traveling for work or are working from home. We're often asked about what the criteria is for the remote workplace because this can be very confusing when it comes to recording injuries and illnesses. So what do employers need to know in this type of setup?
We have received this type of question often due to more and more companies having employees working from home. When employees are at the establishment, they are in the work environment. When employees are working away from the establishment, they carry a bubble of the work environment wherever they go.
Okay, but here's a tricky question for you. Let's say an employee is injured on a work trip while they were out sightseeing. Would this be recordable?
So no, this would not be considered work-related because the person was not performing any job-related tasks when the incident occurred.
Okay, so just to reiterate, if you have employees working from home, that home is considered part of the working environment. Therefore, any injuries or illnesses that occur while an employee is working are considered work-related.
Yes, that's correct. Injuries and illnesses that occur while an employee is working at home office will be considered work-related if the injury or illness occurs while the employee is performing work for pay or compensation in the home, and the injury or illness is directly related to the performance of that work rather than to the general home environment or the setting.
Let's discuss another tricky scenario example. A salesman who works out of his private home slips and falls on ice in his driveway. The employee states he was carrying company property at the time of his fall. Is this work-related?
That is a tricky scenario, but the answer is no. So ice outside the home is part of the general home setting, and injuries and illnesses are only recordable if it is directly related to the performance of the work.
When do we want to consider an injury or illness a new case? This can be especially confusing when there are extenuating circumstances. Am I right?
Yes, for sure. So you'll want to consider an injury or illness as a new case if the employee has not previously experienced a recorded injury or illness of the same type to the same part of the body. If there is a medical opinion regarding the resolution of a case, the employer must follow that opinion. If two or more licensed healthcare professionals make conflicting recommendations, the employer is required to base the decision on the best documented and most well-reasoned evidence. If an exposure triggers a recurrence, it is a new case. This is generally the case in asthma or occupational dermatitis cases. If signs and symptoms recur even in the absence of exposure, it is not a new case. This is common for cases involving silicosis or tuberculosis.
So here's another noteworthy slide for you. Cases that result in days away from work are recordable. The employer is to check the box for days away cases and count the number of days that the employee is away from work. The day of the injury or illness is not counted as a day away.
So while we do know that cases that result in days away from work are recordable, it is important to note that the day of the injury or illness itself is not counted. You begin counting days away on the day after the injury occurred or the illness began. You may cap the total days away at 180 calendar days. To clarify, you are not required to keep track of the number of calendar days away from work if the injury or illness resulted in more than 180 calendar days away from work and/or days of job transfer or restriction. In such a case, entering 180 in the total days away field will be considered adequate. Also, it is important to note that an employee is considered to be on restricted work activity if he or she is unable to work a full shift or is unable to perform all the work activities he or she would be expected to do at least once during the week. So here's another example. An employee has a work-related injury and is examined by a physician. The employee was released to return to full work duty with a 30-pound lifting restriction. This employee works in an office setting and is not expected to lift more than 30 pounds during a normal work week. An employee's routine job functions are those activities the employee normally performs at least once per week. In this scenario, the employee is restricted from activities that he or she may have only performed once or twice a month and does not meet the definition of a routine job function.
How would someone calculate the days to report?
So for days away or days restricted, always count the calendar days. Under this system, a special case arises when an employee is injured on a Friday or right before vacation and returns the next scheduled day. If a licensed healthcare professional gives information that the employee should not have worked during those days off, then those days should be counted. The employer may stop counting the days when they reach 180 days from work or days of restricted work or both. We then know that this was a serious case. The employer may also stop counting days if the employee leaves the company for some reason not related to the injury or illness, for example, a plant shutdown or retirement. If the employee is away from work for an extended time, the employer must record the case within 7 days with an estimate of the days away and then must update the day count when the actual number of days away or restricted becomes known.
All right, so let's take another break here for an Insta Safety quiz. An employee sustains a recordable injury that required 6 days away from work. However, the employee was already scheduled to take one vacation day the Monday after the injury occurred. How many days need to be recorded on the company's OSHA 300 log? Is it A, 7 days, the day of the incident plus 6 days away to recover, B, 6 days, C, 4 days, the 4 days after the Monday of the following week, or D, 5 days, 6 required days minus the 1 Monday vacation day? Now this one's a little tricky, so take your time and put your answer in the chat box below.
So the answer is B, 6 days, 6 required days. You must count the number of calendar days the employee was unable to work as a result of the injury or illness, regardless of whether or not the employee was scheduled to work on those days. Weekend days, holidays, vacation days, or other days off are included in the total number of days recorded if the employee would have not been able to work on those days because of a work-related injury or illness. So let's talk a little bit about medical treatment. If a work-related injury or illness results in medical treatment beyond first aid, you must record it on the OSHA 300 log. What is considered to be medical treatment? So OSHA states that medical treatment does not include visits to a physician solely for observation and counseling, including follow-up visits. Medical treatment also does not include diagnostic procedures such as x-rays, blood tests, or MRIs. Use of prescription medications for diagnostic purposes is also not considered medical treatment. For example, prescription eye drops used to dilate the pupils. And finally, medical treatment does not include first aid procedures. We will review what OSHA considers to be first aid treatment on the next few slides.
All right, so then is first aid treatment different?
Yeah, so first aid treatment is different. OSHA defines first aid by using a list of procedures that are all inclusive. Therefore, if a procedure is not on this list, it is not considered first aid for record-keeping purposes. The first item in the list is using non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength. This means that if an employee is provided prescription medications or non-prescription medications at prescription strength, it is considered medical treatment. The rule also makes it clear that wound coverings, butterfly bandages, and steri-strips are considered first aid. However, use of wound closure methods such as sutures, medical glues, or staples is considered medical treatment. The rule also makes it clear that hot or cold therapy is first aid regardless of how many times it is used. Here are the remaining list of procedures defined by OSHA as first aid treatment. If the employee only receives first aid treatment, it is not recordable, as a reminder. While removing foreign bodies from the eye using irrigation or a cotton swab is first aid, using other methods to remove materials from the eye is considered medical treatment. Physical therapy or chiropractic treatment is considered medical treatment and should not be confused with massage therapy for first aid. Also, drinking fluids for relief of heat stress is first aid, but administering fluids through an IV is considered medical treatment.
All right, so we have another Insta Safety quiz. This is a scenario for you. An employee was rushed to the urgent care center when he had a small flake of metal embedded in his eye while working. The urgent care center removed the metal flake with metal tweezers. The healthcare provider then gave the employee eye drops. Is this recordable? A, no, because they did not require stitches. B, yes, the doctor removed the flake by means other than flushing. C, no, the employee did not miss a full day of work. Or D, yes, because the employee was seen by a doctor. So again, another tricky one. We just want to make sure that you're understanding the information. So take your time and put your answer in the chat box below.
So the answer to this one is B. Yes, the doctor removed the flake by means other than flushing. While removing foreign bodies from the eye using irrigation or a cotton swab is considered first aid, using other methods to remove materials from the eye is considered medical treatment. In this scenario, the urgent center has used tweezers to remove the metal flake and therefore is considered recordable.
Now that we've looked at the basics of recordable incidents, how to document an injury, and what defines medical treatment, let's look at some specific types of injuries you may run into in the workplace. OSHA believes that the most significant injuries and illnesses will result in one of the criteria listed in 1904.7a, death, days away from work, restricted work or job transfer, medical treatment beyond first aid, or loss of consciousness. However, there are some significant injuries, such as a punctured eardrum or a fractured toe or rib, for which neither medical treatment nor work restrictions may be recommended. In addition, there are some significant progressive diseases, such as biostenosis, silicosis, and some types of cancer, for which medical treatment or work restrictions may not be recommended at the time of diagnosis, but are likely to be recommended as the disease progresses. OSHA believes that cancer, chronic irreversible diseases, fractured or cracked bones, and punctured eardrums are generally considered significant injuries and illnesses and must be recorded at the initial diagnosis, even if medical treatment or work restrictions are not recommended or are postponed in a particular case.
So this next provision has the greatest effect on the healthcare sector, especially hospitals and nursing homes. The rule requires the recording of all work-related needle sticks and cuts from contaminated sharp objects. If you are required to maintain a log of occupational injuries and illnesses under the record-keeping standard, you must also establish and maintain a sharps injury log for recording injuries from contaminated sharps. The sharps log must contain, at a minimum, information about the injury, the type and brand of device involved in the injury, if that's known, the department or work area where the exposure occurred, and an explanation of how the incident occurred. The 300 log must be recorded and maintained in such a manner to protect the confidentiality of the injured employee and listed as a privacy case.
Medical removal incidents are when the employer records a case of an employee being removed from work based on the standard criteria. Several OSHA standards have specific criteria outlining when it may be necessary to do so, this including lead, cadmium, and benzene standards. The case is recorded as a days away or restricted work case, depending on how the employer deals with the removal. If employers voluntarily remove employees when they experience levels below the thresholds outlined in the standard, the case does not need to be recorded under this paragraph.
While most of the record-keeping questions we receive are primarily focused on injuries, it is important to take a look at when hearing loss case is considered to be an OSHA recordable. Hearing loss is no joke. It can happen suddenly or over time and get progressively worse. In the workplace, employers must record work-related hearing loss cases when an employee's hearing test shows a marked decrease in overall hearing. Here's when you need to record a hearing loss case on your OSHA 300 log. A recordable hearing loss case occurs when an employee experiences a standard threshold shift. The standard threshold shift is work-related, and the employee's hearing loss exceeds 25 decibels from audiometric 0 in the same ear as the standard threshold shift. For hearing loss cases, you want to make sure to check hearing loss under column M on your OSHA 300 log. If a physician or other licensed healthcare professional determines that the hearing loss is not work-related or has not been significantly aggravated by occupational noise exposure, employers are not required to report this case.
We're coming to the end of our webinar today, and we want to wrap up the key points that we just went over.
Record keeping is required for most businesses, and it is a good way to evaluate your workplace's injuries and illnesses in order to help prevent future incidents from occurring. Covered employers must report each fatality, injury, or illness that is work-related is considered a new case as well. Make sure you complete the OSHA 300 log accurately. You don't want to leave out any specific details. Have one of our consultants review it for you and ask us for assistance with any questions by calling us at 888-403-6026 or emailing us over at safetyquestions@lancastersafety.com. You also want to make sure to post the 300A form from February 1st to April 30th every year. If you experience an employee who has a terrible work-related accident such as loss of an eye, amputation, or inpatient hospitalization, you must report the incident within 24 hours. If you tragically experience an employee who dies because of a work-related accident, you must report it to OSHA within 8 hours.
And this slide shows the criteria for reporting a serious injury. Again, you can report to OSHA by calling OSHA's free confidential number, or by calling your local OSHA area office during normal business hours, or by using the online form at OSHA.gov. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen in today. Just as a quick reminder, we are a nationwide OSHA consulting firm that offers safety and health training on site or through a learning management system. We help with OSHA inspections, audits, develop written programs, and so much more. So feel free to reach out to us after this webinar for any questions at 888-403-6026. Also, make sure to follow us on social media for more news, updates, and safety information, or you can provide us with feedback on either Yelp, Google, or Facebook. We really do appreciate your time today, and we hope you'll take advantage of our monthly safety and health webinars. Everyone is always invited to attend, and they're always free. Just visit our website for more information.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me as well. I always enjoy an opportunity to discuss OSHA's record-keeping requirements with everyone. Remember, if you maintain your record-keeping forms accurately and involve both employees and management on tracking the trends of work-related incidents, you can develop proper mitigation methods to prevent future incidents and illnesses. Thank you, everyone, and have a safe day.